Hello, my fellow patriots. Come on in to O'Reilly's Corner, where we keep the lights on current political issues as well as on past egregious acts, of which there are plenty. Today, I want to talk about Iran, not through slogans, breaking news alerts, but through what's actually happening on the ground. The streets of Tehran are absolutely alive with something so foreign, so bold, so completely unprecedented. Iranian women are dancing in the streets without hijabs right in the heart of the city. And not to be outdone, this wave of defiance comes on the heels of another viral act of protest. Again, unbelievable. Woman in Iran lighting cigarettes from burning photos of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khomeini. Over the past several weeks, Iran has seen some of the most intense protests in years. I remember that when I was in college, when the Shah was overthrown after widespread protests back in 1979, I think it was. Anyway, back then they opted for this lunatic religious leader, Khomeini. The country went back in time about 1,000 years. Now they've gone full circle and want a modern government, ironically, led by the Shah's son, who lives in exile in the U.S. And what began as economic anger has turned into direct challenge to the archaic state itself, and the government responded brutally through violence, mass arrest, threats of executions, and executions themselves. Lots of them. We don't know how many because they shut down the damn internet, but the estimates are in the thousands. And in response and in support of these valiant protesters, President Trump warned that if the attacks and executions continued, America, and presumably Israel, would retaliate massively. This was not a suggestion. This was not potential. This was going to happen. And Trump has a lot of street creds after that Venezuelan operation. So stick with me, because we're about to separate fear from fact, rhetoric from reality, and talk about what's really at stake here. And please, take a second, hit that like and subscribe button. I know you heard this before, but it really does help. Once you hit it, you're done. There's no obligations. It's absolutely free. As we used to say in the cockpit, set it and forget it. Really helps me out, though. Appreciate it. The demonstrations erupted across the country. At first, as I said, protesters protesting about prices and corruption. But when Iranian security forces responded with vicious, indiscriminate, deadly force, something shifted, something snapped. Protesters, well, they got pissed, to say the least. And Iran's response was swift and it was vicious. Security forces on the ground fired live ammunition indiscriminately at the protesters. Thousands were killed or seriously injured. Fear spread, but so did anger. I cut that video short because it was just too disturbing. These were real people. Real people inside those body bags. Someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's parent, friend, indiscriminately murdered in the streets by their own medieval government. Then came the execution threats. Iran's judiciary announced fast-track trials for protesters, which means the verdicts were already in long before any trial's going to start. And the charge? waging war against God. Did you get that? Waging war against God, which of course carries the death penalty. I mean, you're waging war against God. This announcement wasn't vague. It was meant to intimidate, and it did intimidate. One protester in particular, a 26-year-old man named Irfan Soltani, was publicly reported to have received a death sentence. Many others were also facing executions by hanging. Reportedly, the regime was going to publicly hang over 800 people for waging war against God. That is until President Trump stepped in and said, "Do it, and you'll be bombed the likes of which no one has seen before," or something to that effect.
This could become one of the most chilling moments in Iran's recent history. For the first time since nationwide protests erupted against Iran's leadership, authorities are reportedly preparing to execute a protester by hanging, a move that would mark a dangerous escalation in how dissent is punished. His name is Irfan Soltani. He is 26 years old. Soltani is facing imminent execution, making him the first protester to be hanged since the anti-Khamenei demonstrations began. His alleged offense was taking part in protests against Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, protests that began as economic demonstrations but have since evolved into a nationwide political movement. Iran has been gripped by severe economic hardship. The Iranian rial has collapsed in value, inflation has surged, and basic goods have become increasingly unaffordable. Human rights groups say Soltani was denied basic legal rights from the moment of his arrest. He reportedly had no access to a lawyer, was never given a real chance to defend himself, and was kept in the dark about key details of his case. His family says they were informed on January 11th that he had already been sentenced to death. They were allowed just 10 minutes to see him, a brief visit that may have been their last.
Executions that were imminent did not occur. They did not happen. Trump may have saved countless innocent lives again. Iranian officials denied there were ever any plans of mass executions, but said they will hold off on any executions for now. Of course there were plans for mass executions. They said there were. They announced it. There are probably still mass executions going on. They were there to intimidate. These executions were going to be massive. They were going to be public. The only reason that this young man, Irfan Soltani, and so many countless others are still alive, or hopefully are still alive, is because of President Trump. And despite this, reports continue to surface of executions quietly happening without publicity. Trump's statements of intervention in support of the protesters triggered widespread speculation. Was the U.S. prepared to intervene militarily to protect Iranian protesters? So how likely is the U.S. military attack? How likely are we going to attack? Well, despite the fact that Trump has proven that his words are not just rhetoric, and despite the fact that the U.S. military is moving a massive amount into position, and also a squadron of F-15Es, God knows what else, by most accounts, a U.S.-led military attack of Iran is unlikely. And the U.S. attack is unlikely for 4 reasons, so they say. First, and surprisingly to me anyway, regional support is weak. Key U.S. allies in the Middle East do not want a war with Iran, and they won't assist, which means we won't be able to use their bases, their airspace, etc. Secondly, escalation risks are enormous. Iran does have the ability to retaliate across the region, targeting U.S. forces, allies, and shipping lanes. Third, history matters. Foreign intervention very often weakens protest movements by allowing the regimes to label the protesters as foreign-backed and justify their vicious repression, their vicious acts. And finally, the political reality in Washington limits military action. That's the reality. It limits military action without a direct threat to U.S. forces or its allies. And this doesn't mean that the U.S. is completely passive. Sanctions, diplomatic pressure, international isolation, all of these things are real tools, but they're slow. And for many people facing prison or execution, slow equals silent. So by all accounts, Iran's future will not be decided by Washington. It will be decided by Iranians. So the saying goes. External pressure can only delay executions, but it cannot substitute for internal change. That is the predominant belief, and it makes a lot of sense for all of the reasons that I've just given. But this is Trump. And my hunch tells me there will be U.S. military action against Iran, and it will be very soon, which in my opinion is why he shifted his rhetoric from supporting the Iranian protesters to ridding Iran of their nuclear ambitions. Trump needs a threat to the U.S. in order for him to strike. Supporting Iranian protests, while commendable, doesn't satisfy that requirement. An Iranian nuclear program does. Either way, what we are witnessing in Iran is a government that fears its own people, and its own people who fear their own government. But those brave Iranian people are increasingly willing to confront these fears despite the enormous risk, even the ultimate risk. There are no clean endings here, no easy victories, just people demanding dignity and a future for themselves and for their children. And a lunatic, theocratical government willing to use whatever force and intimidation is necessary to stop them. So stay tuned. Hey, thanks for coming in to O'Reilly's Corner. Check out my other video on Greenland. What the hell happened in Davos? I'm Mike O'Reilly.